This aircraft was never meant to fly like the others. It was built to explode upward, strike once, and gamble everything on a few violent seconds. In 1944, while Allied bombers darkened the skies over Germany, engineers unleashed the Me-163 Komet, the only rocket-powered fighter ever to reach real combat. It did not chase enemies. It ambushed them from below, climbing at angles that felt less like flight and more like defiance. In under 4 minutes, it could tear past 39,000 feet, faster than pilots could think, faster than air defenses could react. But every second of that speed was borrowed. Fuel vanished almost as quickly as altitude appeared. Miss the moment, and the aircraft became a powerless glider, drifting home while enemy fighters hunted it. The Me-163 was not a promise of victory. It was a warning about speed without margin and innovation without mercy under extreme pressure. The Me-163 was designed around a single, ruthless idea: reach the bombers before anything else could. Everything about it was stripped down, compressed, and unforgiving. At just over 19 feet long, it was barely larger than a delivery truck, yet it carried forces that could tear a pilot apart. There was no excess structure, no redundancy for comfort, no room for error. The fuselage was divided into tight compartments, each serving one purpose and one purpose only: fuel, engine, pilot. Even electricity was rationed, generated by a small propeller spinning in the nose as the aircraft screamed through the air. This was not elegant engineering. It was survival engineering. The Me-163 was built for a war Germany was already losing, where minutes mattered more than safety and speed mattered more than life. Every design choice made one promise: you will arrive on time or not return at all alive. The Me-163 was shockingly small for what it was asked to do. Standing just over 8 feet tall and less than 20 feet long, it looked almost fragile on the ground. But this was no mistake. Size was sacrificed so speed could survive. Every pound removed meant more altitude, more seconds, one more chance to intercept the bombers. The structure followed a brutal logic: duralumin steel, where strength was unavoidable, lightweight materials everywhere else. The aircraft was assembled in sections, bolted together like a machine built for rapid replacement, not longevity. Nothing here was designed to last. It was designed to perform once, violently, under impossible conditions. The Me-163 wasn't built to age, evolve, or adapt. It was built to be used immediately before time, resources, and reality finally ran out. The Me-163 had no energy to waste. Its onboard batteries were so limited that even basic systems couldn't rely on them. Instead, electricity came from a small, wind-driven generator, mounted in the nose, spinning only while the aircraft was moving at extreme speed. If the Me-163 slowed, power disappeared. Radios, instruments, weapons, everything depended on momentum. This aircraft did not idle. It did not wait. It existed only in motion. Every system assumed one thing: the engine would burn, the air would rush, and time would collapse forward. The moment speed vanished, the Me-163 was no longer a weapon. It was already in trouble. The wings were where the Me-163 crossed into dangerous territory. Thick, sharply swept, and built largely from wood, they looked outdated until they weren't. At a 25-degree sweep, these wings gave the aircraft stability at speeds where other fighters began to shake themselves apart. The structure was brutally simple: plywood skins, wooden spars, glued and clamped under pressure, no luxury materials. No margin for repair in the air. Yet this design did something extraordinary. When the rocket engine shut down, the Me-163 didn't fall, it transformed. The same wings that survived extreme acceleration now turned the aircraft into a high-performance glider, silently carrying it back toward the runway. Slotted leading edges reduced stall speed, buying pilots precious control during landing, the most dangerous phase of the mission. These wings weren't graceful. They were functional weapons, engineered to survive violence, then endure helplessness seconds later. The Me-163 abandoned the idea of balance. There was no horizontal tail, no elevator to steady the aircraft, because the rocket's exhaust burned hot enough to warp metal. Instead, control moved to the wings. Elevons handled pitch and roll together, demanding constant, precise input. Pull too hard and the nose snapped up. Push too far and altitude vanished. Nothing felt forgiving. At hundreds of miles per hour, tiny movements carried brutal consequences. The rudder handled yaw, but even it was linked to the tail wheel on the ground, a reminder that this machine was never meant to behave like a fighter. Pilots didn't fly the Me-163. They negotiated with it. Every second in the air required discipline, restraint, and nerve. One mistake didn't ruin the mission. It ended it. The Me-163 carried no warning shots. Its two 30mm cannons were built to end encounters instantly. A single trigger pull unleashed explosive shells powerful enough to tear a heavy bomber apart in seconds. Pilots had barely 6 seconds of fire before the guns ran dry. There was no room for correction, no second pass guaranteed. At closing speeds over 500 miles per hour, aiming became an act of prediction, not precision. Miss. And the moment was gone forever. Hit, and a B-17 could vanish in fire and debris. This wasn't dogfighting. It was high-speed execution, compressed into a blink of time where hesitation meant failure. The Me-163 was not powered by fuel in the familiar sense. It was driven by chemistry on the edge of catastrophe. At its core sat the Walter rocket engine, a device that did not warm up. It detonated into life. A steam turbine spun the pumps, valves snapped open, and thrust arrived instantly. At full power, the engine shoved the aircraft forward with more than 3,000 pounds of force, turning the runway into a blur and the sky into a vertical wall. But this violence came with a clock. Every second of thrust erased another margin of survival. The engine burned through propellant so fast that pilots measured missions in minutes, not distance. Throttle settings existed in theory. In practice, there was no gentle use. Reduced power saved almost nothing. Full power saved time. The start sequence alone was a test of nerve. Miss a step and the engine could misfire, explode, or poison the aircraft. Once lit, there was no pause button. The Me-163 either climbed like a missile or died on the ground. Speed was absolute. Duration was not. This engine didn't offer endurance. It offered a brief, terrifying advantage, and then it was gone forever afterward. The Me-163's greatest danger wasn't enemy fire. It was the liquid surrounding the pilot. Two separate fuels, stored inches from the cockpit, ignited on contact with each other. One acted as an oxidizer, the other as fuel, and together they burned without a spark. A leak didn't cause a fire. It caused dissolution. Skin, fabric, and metal could be eaten away in seconds. Even a small spill was often fatal. Because of this, pilots flew wearing heavy protective suits, sealed and stiff, as if preparing for a chemical disaster instead of combat. Every valve, hose, and tank had to survive intense vibration and acceleration. Many did not. Accidents during refueling killed experienced pilots before they ever reached the runway. The Me-163 demanded absolute trust in a system that routinely tried to kill its own operators. In this aircraft, survival began long before takeoff, and often ended there as well. Climbing into the Me-163 was not entering a fighter. It was sealing yourself inside a pressureless capsule built around risk. The cockpit offered no pressurization, no comfort, and no escape once the engine ignited. In minutes, the aircraft would claw its way toward the edge of human tolerance, forcing the pilot's body to keep up with brutal acceleration and thin air. Before flying, pilots trained in altitude chambers and followed strict diets, because even trapped gas inside the body could become agony during the climb. The instrument panel was dense and unforgiving. Airspeed, climb rate, turbopump revolutions, fuel pressure, every gauge mattered, and every glance stole attention from survival. There was no traditional throttle, only fixed power settings that turned decisions into commitments. Once selected, consequences followed fast. Armor protected the pilot from bullets, but nothing shielded him from physics. Oxygen systems had to work perfectly. Radios had to function long enough to matter. There was no room for hesitation. In this cockpit, the pilot wasn't managing a mission. He was managing seconds, watching systems tick down towards zero, fully aware that speed could save him or trap him without warning. Takeoff was violence. The Me-163 never taxied, never waited. A wheeled dolly hurled it forward as the rocket ignited, pinning the pilot back while the runway vanished beneath him. At 80 miles per hour, control surfaces finally bit the air. At 200, the aircraft lifted free. Moments later, the dolly was jettisoned and the Komet pitched skyward, 70 degrees, almost vertical. The climb rate reached 266 feet per second, far beyond anything in the sky. In under 4 minutes, the aircraft tore past 39,000 feet. Below, the battlefield shrank. Ahead, bomber formations appeared like slow-moving targets frozen in time. But the clock was already winning. Fuel drained relentlessly. Every second of climb stole a second of escape. This ascent was not flight. It was a countdown, written straight up into the sky. Once the engine fell silent, gravity would reclaim everything without mercy below fast. The Me-163 Komet was proof that speed alone is not control. It reached heights no fighter could match, yet left its pilots with almost no room to survive their own success. Innovation pushed without margin becomes a trap, not a solution. That lesson goes far beyond aviation. It applies to technology, ambition, and the pace we choose to live by. If this story made you think, like the video, share it with someone who values depth over hype, and subscribe for more stories where history warns the present.